She had $1 left and nowhere to sleep, so she bought something no one else would touch. The county had auctioned it twice, and twice nobody raised a paddle. But Ruth wasn't buying a boat. She was buying the only door left that nobody had bothered to lock. Ruth Hennessy knelt on the warped deck of a riverboat that hadn't moved in 5 years, pressing both palms flat against a steel hatch that someone had welded shut from the inside. The metal was cold enough to ache through her fingers. Rust flaked off in brittle sheets the color of dried blood, and beneath her knees the deck groaned like it was thinking about giving up entirely. The tarnished brass key on its leather cord swung forward from under her charcoal Henley and tapped the hatch once, a small, bright sound in all that silence. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. 3 weeks before she knelt on that deck, Ruth Hennessy had a house, a checking account with $211 in it, and a marriage that had ended on paper 14 months ago. The house went first. A Barron Fork County deputy named Whalen showed up at 7:40 in the morning on a Tuesday, breath fogging in the October air, and taped an eviction notice to the front door of the rented duplex on Sycamore Street, while Ruth stood on the other side of it in socks, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She heard the tape pull. She heard the paper flatten against the wood. She didn't open the door until his cruiser pulled away. Here's what the notice said, in language designed to sound like nobody's fault. The lease on the duplex was held solely in the name of Craig Hennessy. Craig Hennessy had terminated the lease effective 30 days prior. The current occupant, that would be Ruth, had 72 hours to vacate. Craig, her ex-husband, the man who'd signed every document in his name alone for 26 years because, as he liked to put it, it's just simpler this way, Ruth. Simpler for him. Simpler when he decided to leave. Simpler when he wanted to make sure she had nothing to stand on, nothing to point to, nothing with her name on it that a court would care about. Craig Hennessy, who once told her across a kitchen table that she should be grateful he kept her around as long as he did, that she wasn't exactly the kind of woman people fought to hold on to. That's the kind of man Craig was. Remember that. Ruth didn't argue with the notice. She didn't call Craig. She didn't call a lawyer she couldn't afford or a friend she didn't have. She packed. What fit in the back seat of a 2004 Honda Civic with 213,000 miles on it, 2 garbage bags of clothes, a canvas tote of toiletries, a shoebox of documents, birth certificate, social security card, the divorce decree she'd printed at the library, a sewing tin that had been her mother's, dented copper with a faded label for Danish butter cookies that had never held cookies in Ruth's lifetime, and the brass key on the leather cord, which she lifted from the bathroom hook and settled around her neck, tucking it under her Henley where it rested against her sternum like a second heartbeat. The key was from her mother's house, a house sold 20 years ago to pay medical bills. The key opened nothing anymore. She wore it anyway. She did the math in the parking lot of the Dollar General on Route 60. $211 in checking, minus $38 for gas. The Civic drank like a man with regrets. Minus $14.50 for a box of saltine crackers, 2 gallons of water, and a sleeping bag rated to 40 degrees that she did not believe for a second was rated to 40 degrees. That left her $158.50. She wrote the number on the back of a receipt with a pen she'd taken from the bank. Then she sat in the driver's seat and pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes until the pressure steadied her. That first night, she slept in the Civic behind the Rite Aid, reclined as far as the seat would go, which was not far. Barron Fork, West Virginia. Population 1,100 on a generous day. One diner called Mabel's where the coffee was decent and the pity was free. One hardware store. A post office open Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The kind of town where the only thing growing was the distance between the people who stayed and the reasons to. Day 2. Ruth walked into the post office to check general delivery, habit from the weeks she'd spent forwarding mail to nowhere, and a flyer taped inside the window caught her eye. County surplus auction. The list was short. A broken riding mower, 2 pallets of water-damaged ceiling tile, and Lot 7. Lot 7 read like a warning. 1, in parentheses 1, steel-hulled riverboat, partially submerged, moored at Briggs Landing, sold as is, where is, minimum bid $1. It had been listed 3 times, no takers. The name Briggs Landing meant nothing to her, not yet. Ruth drove to the county clerk's office, which shared a building with the assessor and smelled like copy toner and mildew. The clerk was a man named Dennis, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the kind of man who'd learned to be gentle with bad news because he delivered so much of it. He pulled up Lot 7 on his screen, looked at Ruth standing in her faded olive field jacket with her hands in her pockets, and his face did something complicated. "Ma'am, that boat's been sitting since the owner died in 2019. Nobody even wanted it for scrap." He said it like he was trying to save her from herself. "I'd like to bid $1, Ruth said. Dennis processed the paperwork. Ruth signed the single-page receipt on the hood of her Civic in the parking lot, the pen skipping on cold metal. $1. $157.50 remaining. She now owned a sinking boat on a river in a town where nobody knew her name. The gravel road along the Gauley River ran 11 miles from town to Briggs Landing, winding through bare sycamores and rock cuts where the hillside had been blasted away decades ago for a rail line that never came. Ruth's Civic rattled over every pothole like it was personally offended. And then she saw it. A 74-foot steel-hulled former work barge, converted decades ago into something that had once been a houseboat, listing 8 degrees to starboard. The stern sat partially submerged in brown river water. The bow rested on a mud shelf like a jaw on a fist. Paint peeled off the hull in long, pale sheets. A gangplank of warped planks led from the bank to the deck, and the whole thing looked like it was one hard rain from joining the river for good. But that's not what Ruth saw first. What she saw first was the dog. A large, old German Shepherd mix, lying at the top of the gangplank, chin on his front paws. His coat was thin, tan and black, gone gray around the muzzle and ears. His ribs showed faintly through his sides. His left ear was torn and healed smooth. He lifted his head and watched her park. Brown eyes, patient as stone. He did not bark. He did not stand. He waited, the way something waits when it has been waiting a very long time and has learned not to hope too loudly. Ruth turned off the engine. The Civic ticked in the cold. She sat there with her hands on the wheel, the brass key warm against her chest, looking at a dog who was looking at her like he'd been expecting someone and she'd do. Ruth steps onto the gangplank and the old dog, she will learn his name is Dutch, shifts aside to let her pass without standing up, as if he has been saving her a seat. He doesn't bark, doesn't growl, just pulls his gray muzzle off his front paws long enough to track her boots as they cross the planks, then sets his chin back down like that's all the introduction either of them needs. His torn left ear has healed smooth, and his ribs show faintly through a thinning tan and black coat, and he looks at her with patient brown eyes that say he's been here a while. Longer than anyone. Ruth pucks a wisp of silver-gray hair behind her ear and steps onto the deck. The upper deck is smaller than she expected, a wheelhouse with cracked glass panels, a helm chair bolted to the floor with rusted lag screws, a navigation table pushed against the starboard wall. On that table sits a coffee mug, white ceramic, no logo. She picks it up and tilts it, dried residue inside, dark, cracked, layered like sediment. Someone drank coffee here. Someone set this mug down and never came back for it. She puts it back exactly where it was. Below deck, a narrow corridor runs the length of the hull. 3 small cabins branch off it, each one barely wider than the cot frames bolted to their walls. Mildew has crept up the corners in dark fans, and the air tastes like river water and old wood and something faintly metallic, like rust or blood pennies. But the walls are solid. The ceiling doesn't bow. Above the waterline, this boat is structurally sound, and Ruth knows enough about structures to know the difference between neglect and collapse. This is neglect. Neglect can be fixed. The galley kitchen sits midship. A 2-burner propane stove, a steel sink with a hand pump, Open shelving with 3 plates and 2 mugs, and a cast iron skillet so well seasoned it's almost black. A small table bolted to the floor with 1 chair. At the stern end of the corridor, a bulkhead door. Steel. She presses her palm against it and pulls it back. Cold. The kind of cold that means water on the other side. She can hear it. A slow, heavy shifting behind the steel. The stern compartment is flooded. Not a leak, a flood. The door is holding, but whatever's behind it belongs to the river now. And then there's the hatch. In the floor of the main cabin, bolted and welded shut with thick bead welds. Not factory work, not machine-laid. Hand welds, deliberate. Someone dragged a torch down here and sealed this hatch on purpose, bead by bead, the way you seal something you don't want opened by accident or by strangers. Ruth crouches and runs her fingers along the weld line. Rough, heavy, done by someone who knew what they were doing and meant every inch of it. She braces a pry bar against the seam and pushes. Nothing. Not a creak, not a shift. She leans her whole weight into it, and the bar skids off the weld bead and rings against the steel floor like a bell. She's going to need a cutting torch. She doesn't have a cutting torch. She has $211, a sleeping bag rated to 40 degrees, a half sleeve of saltine crackers, and a tarnished brass key on a leather cord that has never opened anything she's found yet. She sits back on her heels and stares at the hatch. That's when she hears footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow, unhurried. The kind of walk that belongs to a man who knows exactly where he's going because he's been going there for years. Walt Briggs comes down the bank in a burgundy wool cardigan with a worn black ballpoint pen clipped to the breast pocket, a faded blue chambray shirt beneath it, and a dented green Stanley thermos in his left hand. He's broad-shouldered and stocky, white hair cropped close on the sides, thick on top and combed straight back. Deep brown eyes behind tortoiseshell half-moon reading glasses on a beaded chain. Military straight spine. Hands that look like they've built things and fixed things and carried things for other people without being asked. He stops at the gangplank. Dutch lifts his head. Walt nods at the dog like they've had this conversation before, then looks up at Ruth on the deck. "I'm Walt. I knew the man who lived on this boat." That's it. He doesn't ask her name, doesn't ask what she paid, doesn't ask why a woman in a faded olive field jacket with frayed jeans and scuffed brown boots would buy a half-sunk riverboat for $1. He sets the thermos on the deck rail, and his hand rests flat on the wood for a moment, steady as a plumb line. Propane's off at the valve under the port gunnel. Turn it counterclockwise. Stove works on the second try. Then he walks back up the gravel road. Didn't linger. Didn't watch. Ruth finds the valve, turns it counterclockwise. The stove clicks on the first try and catches on the second, and a blue flame hisses to life in the galley like a small promise being kept. She heats water. She feeds Dutch half the sleeve of crackers. $1.25 she can't afford, and her checking account drops to $209.75 in her head, which is where she keeps the math now because looking at it on a screen makes it too real. The dog eats slowly, carefully, 1 cracker at a time, like he hasn't been fed regularly in a long time but remembers how to be polite about it. She sleeps on the cabin floor in the 40-degree sleeping bag. Dutch lies across the doorway, not guarding her, just there. Day 3. Ruth explores methodically, cabin by cabin, drawer by drawer. A man's reading glasses in the navigation desk, wire-rimmed, 1 arm bent, a pencil stub, a tide chart from 2019, and tacked to the galley wall with a single brass nail, a photograph. A man in his 30s standing on this same deck, dark hair, squinting into sun, 1 hand resting on the head of a young German shepherd with both ears still intact. She pulls the photo from the nail and turns it over. In pencil, faded but legible. Harold and Dutch, 1998. The dog's name. The man's name, Harold Briggs. She looks at Dutch in the doorway. He looks back. 26 years on this boat. Ruth starts checking the walls. The galley has beadboard paneling over the steel hull, thin tongue-and-groove planks nailed into furring strips. She knocks. Solid. 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 Then, near the floor, one section sounds different, hollow, a gap between the paneling and the hull where there shouldn't be one. She works a flathead screwdriver under the baseboard. The nails resist, then give. The panel pops free with a sound like a held breath releasing. Ruth pries the first baseboard panel free in what was once the galley kitchen, and behind it, stacked neatly in a cavity between the hull wall and the interior paneling, are 14 sealed envelopes, each one addressed in the same careful handwriting to Ruth Ann Hennessy, with a different year written in the corner, starting with 1984. Ruth sits on the galley floor with 14 envelopes fanned across her lap, her hands shaking so badly the paper rattles, and she opens 1984 first. The envelope tears along the top where the glue has gone brittle with age. Inside is a card. Not a store-bought card, not a Hallmark with a cartoon bear. A piece of heavy cardstock, folded once, with a cake drawn on the front in blue ballpoint pen. 5 little candles. Somebody drew them carefully, took their time, pressed hard enough that the ink bled through to the other side. Inside, in that same careful handwriting she saw on the envelopes, "Happy first birthday, Ruth Ann. I will find a way." Below the words, tucked into the fold, a United States savings bond. $25, Series EE, dated October 14th, 1984. She opens 1985. "Happy second birthday. Your mother named you after her grandmother. I promised her I would not forget." Another bond. $25, same date, October 14th. She opens 1986, 1987, 1988. Every single one the same structure. A handmade card, a message, a bond. The drawings change. The cake becomes a house. The house becomes a river with a boat on it. By 1989, the drawings stop and the messages get longer, the handwriting pressing harder into the paper like the pen is the only thing holding the man together. By 1990, the messages are full letters. "I went to the courthouse again today. They told me the same thing they told me last year. Craig has the legal standing, and I have nothing but a boat and a welding torch. They don't say it that way, but that's what they mean. You are 7 years old today, and I have never held you. I bought you a bond anyway. I will keep buying them until you can hold them yourself." Ruth's throat closes. She presses the heel of her hand against her eyes until the pressure steadies her. The tarnished brass key on its leather cord shifts against her collarbone as she leans forward, and she holds it there, knuckles white. By 1994, the letters are 2 pages. The handwriting is smaller now, cramped, like he's running out of room and refusing to use a second card. "You are 11. I don't know if you like school. I don't know if you read books or climb trees or hate math the way your mother did. I don't know anything about you except that you exist, and that is enough to keep me going." I filed again. The lawyer, I don't have a lawyer, I wrote it myself. The clerk said my petition was denied because I could not demonstrate stable housing. I live on a boat. I have lived on this boat for 30 years. It is more stable than anything Craig Hennessy ever built, but they don't count it that way. Then, 1997. The last envelope. The paper inside is different, thinner, cheaper, like he grabbed what was near. The handwriting shakes, not from carelessness, from age or exhaustion or something heavier than both. "Happy 14th birthday. I have not stopped trying. The court says no again. I am putting this where you will find it when the time comes. No drawing, no house, no river, no boat. Just the bond. $25. October 14th, 1997. And below his signature, one more line. "You were always wanted." 14 bonds. $25 each at purchase. $350 face value. Bought one at a time over 14 years by a man who welded barges for a living. Ruth doesn't know what they've matured to. She doesn't do the math yet. She just sits there on the cold galley floor with the cards spread around her like a paper quilt, and Dutch lying 3 feet away with his chin on his paws, his patient brown eyes watching her, his torn left ear twitching once when she makes a sound that isn't quite a word. Have you ever held something in your hands that proved someone loved you before you even knew you needed it? Because that's what 14 handmade birthday cards look like when they're spread across a woman's lap in a dead man's boat at the edge of the Gauley River. They look like proof. Here's what the cards tell us, piece by piece, that Ruth never knew. Her mother, Ellen Hennessy, died when Ruth was an infant. Ruth was raised by her stepfather, Craig Hennessy Sr., the man whose name was on the paperwork, whose address was on the court filings, whose legal standing was unimpeachable because he had a house and a job and a signature on a birth certificate. Ruth grew up believing no one had wanted her, that she was left over, that whatever family she might have had simply hadn't bothered. Every system that was supposed to hold her, courts, family, paperwork, told her the same story. You are unclaimed. The cards tell a different story. The cards tell the truth. Walt Briggs shows up the next morning. His truck crunches over the gravel at the landing just after 7, and Ruth hears him before she sees him. The particular heavy thud of a tailgate dropping, the scrape of metal on metal. She comes up the gangplank, and there he is, broad-shouldered and white-haired, his burgundy cardigan buttoned against the morning chill, that dented green Stanley thermos in his left hand, and a cutting torch in the bed of his truck beside a paper bag dark with grease. He holds up the bag. Egg sandwiches, Mabel's, still hot. Ruth takes the bag. She stands there with it. The brass key catches the early light at her collar. Who was Harold Briggs? Walt sets the torch down on the tailgate. His tortoiseshell reading glasses swing on their beaded chain. He looks at her, not with pity, not with caution, just with the flat, steady attention of a man who has been waiting for this question. Harold was your mother's father, Ruth. 1 sentence, 6 words. Then he picks up the thermos and pours coffee into the cap, and the steam curls between them in the cold air, and he drinks. Ruth does not speak for a long time. Walt does not fill the silence. He eats his sandwich leaning against the truck bed. Dutch limps down the gangplank and lies at Ruth's feet, gray muzzle on gray paws, and the river moves behind all of them like it has moved for 100 years, not caring, not stopping. Harold Briggs, river mechanic, welder, a man who worked barges on the Gauley and Kanawha for 40 years, who could cut steel in his sleep and fix an engine by sound. Ellen was his only daughter. When she died, Harold tried to get custody of the baby girl she left behind. Craig Hennessy blocked him. The courts sided with the stepfather, legal parent, stable address, no criminal record. Harold had a boat and a welding rig and no lawyer. He had nothing the system recognized as love. So he wrote birthday cards. He bought bonds. He filed petitions in his own handwriting on lined paper. And he waited. That afternoon, Ruth searches more of the boat. She's methodical now, knocking on walls, pressing panels, running her fingers along seams the way you check a hull for rot. In the head, behind the medicine cabinet, her knuckles find a hollow sound. She pries the panel free with a flathead screwdriver Walt left behind, and behind it sits a thick manila folder, heavy with paper, its edges soft with age. On the tab, in Harold's handwriting, Hennessy, custody filings, 1983 to 1997. Court petitions, denial letters, a handwritten appeal on lined paper, 3 pages long, every margin filled. 14 years of trying, 14 years of being told no. And Ruth realizes the man who lived on this boat spent 14 years trying to get to her. She sat at the galley table with the folder open under the lantern, and Dutch pressed his weight against her left leg like he was trying to hold her to the floor. The custody filings were on yellow legal pad paper. Harold's handwriting, the same blocky print she'd seen on every label in this boat, filled the margins, the headers, the body of each motion. 7 filings, 7 attempts. 14 years of a man trying to reach a girl he loved, written in pencil on paper you can buy for $1.19 at any drugstore in America. Here's what the court documents prove. The first filing was dated March 1983. Harold Briggs petitioned for visitation rights. Craig Hennessy, Ruth's stepfather, the man who raised her, the man who handed her a garbage bag of clothes and $34 on her 18th birthday and told her to get out, filed a counter motion within 11 days. His filing called Harold transient. Harold lived on a riverboat, that was true. It was also his home, his workshop, and the cleanest vessel on the canal. Craig's lawyer put transient in the filing like it was a diagnosis. The second filing, 1985. Harold petitioned again. Craig's counter-motion added unemployed. Harold was a self-employed welder. He welded barges, repaired dock infrastructure, fixed truck frames for half the county. He paid taxes. He had receipts. But he didn't have a W-2 from a company with a logo, so Craig's lawyer wrote, unemployed, and the judge accepted it. No hearing, no questions, just a stamp. Third filing, 1987. Fourth, 1989. Fifth, 1992. Each one written in Harold's own hand because he could not afford a lawyer. Each motion meticulous, dates, addresses, references, a paragraph explaining his income, his living situation, his relationship to the child. The grammar wasn't perfect. He split infinitives. He misspelled custodial once, crossed it out, spelled it right. He cited West Virginia Family Code by section number. The man taught himself family law from the Putnam County Library to fight for a girl he wasn't allowed to see. And every single time, Craig Hennessy's attorney, a real attorney paid real money, filed a counter-motion that used the same three words: transient, unemployed, unfit. That last one, unfit, appeared starting in the fifth filing. No evidence cited, no incident report, no police record, no substance abuse claim, just the word, sitting there on the page like a bruise. Unfit. The judge accepted it. Every time. Sixth filing, 1995. Seventh, 1997. By the seventh, Harold had written 4 pages, single-spaced. He described the boat. He described his income for the previous 3 years. $14,200, $15,800, $16,340. He described the room he had built. He didn't say a room. He said, a bedroom with a door that locks from the inside and a window that faces the morning sun, with a bed I built from river oak and a shelf for books. He described what he would do if granted visitation. He would take her fishing. He would teach her to weld if she wanted to learn. He would not speak poorly of her mother's husband. He wrote that last part and underlined it. The judge denied the motion in 6 days. Craig Hennessy's counterfiling was 3 sentences long. It didn't even bother with new language, just the same words. Transient, unemployed, unfit. Copy, paste, stamp, done. 7 times. 14 years. And Ruth grew up believing nobody wanted her. Her hand came up slow. She pressed the heel of her palm against her eyes, pressed hard, the kind of pressure that turns the dark behind your eyelids into white static, and held it there until the shaking in her jaw settled into something she could carry. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She just pressed until the pressure steadied her. Then she took her hand away and blinked at the lantern flame until the room came back. She folded the documents into the folder, set them on the table, squared the edges with both hands. Then she stood up and climbed the stairs to the wheelhouse and sat down in Harold's helm chair, the cracked vinyl seat where a man who filed 7 motions in pencil on $19 legal pads had watched this river for almost 50 years. And she looked at the water and she didn't move for a long time. Dutch followed her up. He lay at her feet with his torn left ear flat and his chin on his gray paws, and he didn't move either. Morning came cold off the Kanawha. Walt Briggs arrived at 7:30 with his dented green Stanley thermos and a cutting torch in the bed of his truck. He didn't ask about the folder. He didn't ask about her eyes. He set the thermos on the deck rail and said, "Let's open that hatch." The welded hatch was in the forward deck, a steel plate Harold had sealed with bead welds so clean they looked decorative. Walt showed Ruth how to hold the torch, how to read the bead, how to let the flame do the work. She cut the first weld and it cracked sharp and sudden, like bone snapping. The sound echoed off the water. She cut the second, the third. Each one popped with that same sharp report, and each time Dutch's ears flicked, but he didn't move from his spot by the gangplank. The hatch opened onto a steep steel ladder descending into the forward hold. The air that came up was cool, dry, sealed. No mildew, no rot. Harold had welded it airtight to protect what was inside. The space below was the size of a large bedroom. A steel workbench ran along the port wall with welding tools racked neatly on pegboard, each tool outlined in white paint so you'd know what was missing. A filing cabinet stood against the starboard wall, and on a wooden shelf above the workbench sat 23 composition notebooks, the black and white marbled kind, each one dated on the spine in white paint. 1971 through 2018. 47 years. But the wall is what stopped her. On the aft bulkhead, painted in white block letters in Harold's hand, were names. 237 names. First name, last name, year. Arranged in neat columns from floor to ceiling, and above them a header, People the River Helped. If you've made it this far, stay with me, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Ruth pulled the first notebook from the shelf. 1971. She opened it at the workbench and started reading. Harold's handwriting filled every page. Dates, names, amounts. $50 to a widow on Fraser's Bottom for heating oil, January 1971. $120 for a transmission repair for a man named Garland Sykes, March 1974. A $3,200 surgery fund for a neighbor's wife in 1993, built $20 and $50 at a time over 11 months. A truck engine rebuilt for a young father in 2001, cost of parts only, $47. Harold tracked every act, every dollar, every name. He never told anyone. He never asked to be repaid. He never wrote a single entry that mentioned what he was owed, only what he gave. The scope was staggering. 47 notebooks, 47 years. Groceries left on porches at 4 in the morning. Families sheltered on the boat during the floods of 85 and 03 and 16. Medical bills paid through the hospital's charity desk with cash in an envelope and no return address. Tools lent and never asked back. Welding jobs done for free and invoiced at zero with a note that said, settled. 237 names on a wall, and not one of them knew who to thank. Ruth was still sitting at the workbench with the 11th notebook open, 1981, the year before she was born, when she heard gravel crunch outside. Not Walt's truck, something heavier, smoother. She climbed the ladder and stepped onto the forward deck and looked toward Briggs Landing. A black SUV sat on the gravel with its engine still ticking. A man in a charcoal overcoat stepped out, and tucked under his left arm was a slim black leather portfolio. He looked up at the riverboat the way you'd look at a lot listing. Not at a home, not at a history, but at square footage and scrap value. He straightened his coat. He smiled. Garrett Lyle had come to take the boat, and Ruth, watching from the wheelhouse with the brass key warm against her chest under the Henley, knew it before he opened his mouth. Garrett Lyle walks the gangplank like he owns it already, and Dutch, for the first time since Ruth arrived, stands up and growls, low and steady, from the back of his throat. Now that tells you something. That dog had been lying at Ruth's feet for days, like she'd always been there. Patient, calm, barely lifted his head when Walt came and went. But the second those polished black Oxfords hit the aluminum plank, Dutch's hackles went up, and a sound came out of him that was older than language. The torn left ear flattened, the gray muzzle pulled back just enough to show teeth. Animals know. They always know. Garrett didn't flinch. He smiled, and listen, it was a good smile. Warm, the kind of smile that makes you think, hey, this guy's all right. He extended his hand toward Ruth as she came down from the wheelhouse, that slim black leather portfolio tucked under his left arm like it grew there. Mrs. Hennessy? Garrett Lyle, Lyle River Properties. His handshake was firm, not crushing, calibrated. His hazel green eyes held hers with the practiced ease of a man who had closed 1,000 deals and lost sleep over none of them. I was hoping we could talk about this beautiful stretch of river you found yourself on. Beautiful. Like she'd stumbled onto a vacation and not a half-sunken inheritance she'd paid a crumpled dollar bill for. Here's who Garrett Lyle is. Marina developer out of Charleston. Lyle River Properties, LLC. He builds boutique waterfront operations, kayak rentals, paddleboard launches, craft cocktail bars with string lights and reclaimed wood, the kind of places that get written up in travel magazines by people who have never once in their lives had $23 to their name. He wanted Briggs Landing. He wanted the adjacent parcels. He wanted the whole riverfront stretch and the boat, Harold's boat, the one with 237 names in its walls and decades of invisible mercy sealed in its hull, was in his way. He needed it gone, or he needed to own it. So he offered Ruth $15,000, cash, and by any rational measure, that's generous. That is a stupid amount of money for a half-sunken barge with a leaking galley and a dog that comes with it. 15 grand for something she paid $1 for. The math is easy. The math is screaming at you to take it. Ruth looked at him. The brass key shifted against her collarbone under the charcoal Henley. Her pale, gray-blue eyes gave him nothing. The boat is not for sale. 7 words. No heat, no explanation, no counteroffer. Just a fact laid on the morning air like a stone on a grave. Garrett nodded, pleasant as Sunday. He set his business card on the gangplank railing, tapped it once with a manicured finger. I understand. Take some time. Then he walked back to that black SUV, portfolio under his arm, and drove away on the gravel without spinning a single tire. He wasn't angry. He was patient, and that, right there, is what made him dangerous. Next morning at Mabel's, Walt Briggs set his dented green Stanley thermos on the counter and told Ruth what Garrett had conveniently left out. His white eyebrows didn't move. His deep brown eyes stayed on his coffee. He said it the way you'd read a weather report. Flat, factual, no drama to spare. Lyle River Properties had been buying riverfront parcels along this stretch for 2 years. 6 of the 8 lots acquired. Briggs Landing sat on Lot 7. The county owned Lot 8 and had already agreed to sell. Ruth's $1 boat on its $1 parcel was the only thing standing between Garrett Lyle and a $2.4 million development deal. Walt pushed his tortoiseshell reading glasses up his forehead and refilled his coffee from the thermos. Didn't say another word about it. Changed the subject to whether the galley stove was drafting properly. That was Walt. He gave you the information. What you did with it was your business. 2 days later, Garrett came back. This time, the offer was $35,000. He brought paperwork. Clean, professional, tabbed with colored flags. He stood in the galley with that portfolio open, and he was, damn him, reasonable, specific, kind, even. His sleeve pulled back as he gestured toward the documents, and there it was, that faint birthmark on the inside of his right wrist, intimate as a confession. Ruth, I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm trying to give you a way out. $35,000. That's a fresh start. A deposit on an apartment. A year of breathing room. His voice was soft, earnest, the kind of voice that makes you think the hand reaching for your home is actually reaching to help you up. Son of a bitch almost made it sound like charity. Ruth looked at the paperwork. She looked at Garrett. The wisps of silver-gray hair at her temples caught the lantern light. Her angular jaw was set, but not clenched, not angry, just finished. Those are my terms. The boat is not for sale. Garrett's smile held. He nodded. He left. Have you ever watched someone turn down the only lifeboat in the water? Because that's what Ruth did. Twice. And here's the thing. I'm not sure she was right. Not yet. Not at that point. Because the math was about to get ugly. It is 2:17 a.m. The lantern on the galley table throws a circle of copper light that doesn't reach the walls. Ruth is sitting with Garrett's business card in one hand and her phone in the other. $23 in her checking account. She's done the math 6 times, and it comes out the same every time. Gas to get to town? $12. Food for the week. Crackers and peanut butter, nothing else. $9. That leaves $2. The sleeping bag is rated to 40 degrees, And tonight it is 34 outside, and she can feel every one of those missing 6 degrees in her knuckles. $35,000. An apartment with heat, a door that locks, a life that doesn't require her to do arithmetic with single digits at 2 in the morning. Her thumb moves to the dial button. Then Dutch, lying on the galley floor with his chin on his paws, lifts his gray muzzle and noses open the cabinet door under the sink. Something shifts behind the pipe housing, falls, hits the floor with a papery slap. A manila folder. Ruth picks it up. The label, in Harold's careful handwriting, for Ruth Ann, when she finds this. Inside, 16 U.S. savings bonds, Series EE. Purchased one at a time between 1984 and 1999. Face value, $50 each. Matured value, as of 2024, $52,341. And beneath the bonds, folded once, a letter, a small glass jar. That's what Dutch knocked loose from behind the pipe fitting under the galley sink. A mason jar, the old kind with the wire bail and the glass lid, and inside it, folded tight, sealed with a rubber band that crumbled the second Ruth touched it, was a letter. Not a ledger entry, not a logbook notation. A letter, written on lined paper torn from a composition notebook, in handwriting she had never seen before but recognized in her bones, the way you recognize a melody you heard before language. She set Garrett's card down. She set the phone down. She unscrewed the lantern wick one click brighter, and she unfolded the letter at the galley table with the bonds spread in front of her and read the first line in Harold's handwriting. Ruth Ann, if you are reading this, then the boat found you the way I could not. I'm going to read you the rest, because Harold Hennessy wrote it to be read, and he wrote it knowing he would never hear his own granddaughter's voice say the words back. Your mother was the first person I ever sheltered on this boat, Ellen Marie Hennessy, my daughter. She came aboard at 17 with a split lip and a duffel bag, and I swore on everything I had left that no one would touch her again. She lived in the forward cabin for 11 months. She was brave and she was stubborn, and she had your eyes before you ever opened yours. She left when she was 18 because she believed she could make it on her own, and she was right for a while. She had you when she was 20. I held you once in a hospital room in Barren Fork, and you grabbed my thumb and would not let go. That is the only time I held you. Ellen died when she was 22. You were 2 years old. I filed for custody. I was denied. The court said I had no stable residence, a man living on a boat. They said I had no income documentation, a man paid in cash for welding. They said I was not a suitable guardian. I filed again, denied again. Your caseworker told me to stop trying. I did not stop trying. I filed 4 more times. I was denied 4 more times. The filings are in the cabinet in the forward hold if you need proof. I could not reach you, so I did what I could from where I was. Every bond was bought with welding money. Every birthday card was written at this table. I wrote you one every year. I did not know where to send them, so I kept them. They are in the walls because the walls were the only place I trusted to hold them. I welded the hatch shut in 2018 when my hands started shaking too badly to weld anymore, because I wanted to make sure the archive survived me. 237 people came through this boat over 50 years. You were the reason I started. You were the reason I did not stop. I could not be there, but I could leave you standing. That is the whole of it. Ruth laid the letter flat on the table. She pressed her forehead against her hands, and she stayed there. The narrator does not need to tell you what that felt like. You already know. You've held something in your hands that proved someone loved you before you even knew you needed it. Or you haven't, and you've spent your whole life wondering what it would feel like if you did. Either way, you know. Dutch put his chin on her knee. The lantern hissed. The river moved outside, slow and black and patient, the way it had moved every night Harold Hennessy sat at this same table, writing birthday cards to a girl he was not allowed to see. Morning came the way mornings do on a river, gray, then gold, then ordinary. Ruth took the bonds to the Barren Fork post office. Dennis Greer, the clerk who opened 3 days a week and knew everybody's business without ever repeating it, helped her verify them one at a time. 16 savings bonds, Purchased between 1986 and 2017. Matured value, $52,341. Ruth had not had more than $300 to her name in 11 years. She held the verification printout and her hands were steady now, steady as welded steel. But Garrett Lyle, oh, Garrett wasn't done. The man in the polished black Oxfords with the slim leather portfolio tucked under his left arm had one more card to play, and he played it with the precision of someone who has never lost a hand he bothered to sit down for. He filed a county motion challenging the auction sale. His claim? The parcel was improperly surveyed, and Briggs Landing fell within the boundary of his adjacent lot. His lawyer's paperwork was immaculate, typed, tabbed, indexed. A hearing was set for 3 weeks out, and then he visited Ruth one more time. Stood on the gangplank in a pressed navy coat, hazel green eyes warm and direct, that birthmark on his inner wrist catching the light when he gestured. Last offer, Ruth, $75,000. After the hearing, it might be zero. $75,000. To a woman with $52,000 in bonds she hadn't cashed and $23 in checking. That's 127,000 reasons to say yes. Ruth looked at him the way the river looks at a stone it's been flowing around for a century. I'm not signing. 5 words. Door closed. So Ruth prepared for the hearing the only way she knew how. She went back into the forward hold and opened Harold's filing cabinet, drawer by drawer. 237 names. Every person Harold helped, what he gave, when, and why. She cross-referenced. She read. She traced her finger down columns of cramped handwriting until her vision blurred, and she blinked it clear and kept going. And in the third drawer, under a tab marked L, she found it. Lyle, Thomas, tuition, Marshall University, $4,200, paid in full, 1989. Thomas Lyle, Garrett's father. Harold Hennessy paid for Garrett Lyle's father's college education, and Garrett never knew. Stay with me, because this is the part that matters. The hearing came and went. Ruth presented the ledger. She presented the bonds. She presented the custody filings. All 6 of them denied, 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 denied. The judge reviewed. But the ruling is not the point. The point is what happened after, on the gangplank, when Ruth handed Garrett the folder open to his father's entry. He read it. The portfolio slid off his lap. He sat down on the steps slowly, the way a man sits when the ground has shifted, and he needs to make sure it's still there. The hazel green eyes that had been so alert, so direct, so certain, they went somewhere else, somewhere 30 years back. He did not speak for a long time. Then, I didn't know. Ruth, standing above him, the brass key on its leather cord resting against her charcoal Henley, wisps of silver gray escaping at her temples. Nobody did. That was the point. Garrett Lyle is sitting on the gangplank steps with the filing cabinet folder open on his knees, staring at a donation entry from 1989. Lyle, Thomas, tuition, Marshall University, $4,200, paid in full. And Ruth watches the fight go out of him like a candle in a draft. Garrett Lyle withdraws his motion the following Monday without comment, and the county clerk stamps Ruth's title as final, $1, paid in full, for a 74-foot steel-hulled riverboat and the landing it sits on. No ceremony, no handshake, just a stamp, a date, and a piece of paper that says Ruth Hennessy owns something for the first time in her life. She uses $8,400 of the bond money, not a dollar more. That buys enough marine epoxy, steel plate, and zinc anodes to patch the hull below the waterline where 40 years of river had been working its way through. She pumps the stern compartments herself. 3 days of running Harold's old salvage pump until the water level drops inch by inch and the boat groans, shifts, and settles back to level on the landing cradle for the first time in maybe a decade. Walt teaches her to weld on Harold's rig. She's terrible at first. Burns through 2 rods before she lays a bead that holds. Walt watches from his camp chair on the deck, tortoiseshell half-moon glasses on his nose, the dented green Stanley thermos set beside his boot, and says nothing until the third bead. Then, "That one'll hold." 3 words. She keeps going. The rest of the bond money, every cent of it, she deposits in a new account at the Barren Fork Credit Union. She labels the account River Fund. The teller asks what it's for. Ruth, ash-blonde wisps escaping at her temples, the tarnished brass key resting against her collarbone under the charcoal Henley, looks at the teller and says, "Same thing it was always for." That's it. No explanation, no pamphlet, just a fund with a name and a woman who knows what it means. Then the people start coming. An elderly man named Earl Combs drives a rusted Ford pickup down the gravel road to Briggs Landing on a Tuesday morning and unloads 12 sheets of marine plywood onto the dock without a word. Ruth comes down the gangplank, and he's already climbing back into the cab. She calls out. He stops, looks at her with watery blue eyes and says, "Harold pulled my boy out of the river in '74. Boy was 22. I was 46. Never found a way to pay that back." He drives away. The plywood stays. A woman named Bess Sutter arrives the next day with a casserole in a blue ceramic dish, tinfoil crimped tight around the edges. Taped to the top is a note card in careful cursive. "Welcome home, Harold's granddaughter." Bess doesn't knock. She sets the dish on the deck rail and walks back to her car. Dutch lifts his gray muzzle, sniffs the air, and sets his chin back on his paws. A mechanic named Ray Fenton shows up Thursday in coveralls still dark with grease, a rebuilt bilge pump balanced on one shoulder. He sets it on the deck, wipes his hands on a red shop rag, and looks at Ruth with steady brown eyes. "Your granddaddy kept my trucks running for 30 years. Wouldn't take a dime. Tell me where to start." Ruth points to the engine compartment. Ray nods once and disappears below deck. Every one of them is a name from the wall. Every one carries a single sentence. And the accumulation, listen to me, the accumulation is the proof. Not one person remembering, dozens. Each one a name Harold wrote down decades ago, writing back. Ruth reopens the workshop in the forward hold. She learns from Walt. She learns from Harold's journals, those careful pencil notes about torque specs and weld temperatures and which neighbors need what by when. She starts taking the same jobs Harold took, small repairs, engine work, tool lending. She does not charge. She writes each act in a new composition notebook, same brand Harold used, and she continues the ledger. New names, new entries, the same quiet math. Now, Garrett Lyle. Here's the thing about Garrett that I didn't see coming, and I don't think Ruth did either. 3 weeks after the hearing, a flatbed delivery truck backs down the gravel road to Briggs Landing. 40 treated deck boards, enough to rebuild the gangplank and resurface the entire upper deck. No name on the invoice. Ruth asks the driver who sent it. He checks his clipboard. Lyle River Properties. That's all. Garrett never mentions it. He never comes back to the landing, but the lumber is there, stacked clean and straight on the dock, smelling of fresh-cut pine and copper preservative. Sometimes the fight doesn't go out of a man because he lost. Sometimes it goes out because he finally sees where he's standing. One evening, late, the galley running quiet, the workshop light throwing a warm stripe across the deck, Walt pours coffee from the green thermos into 2 tin cups. His white hair catches the light. The worn black ballpoint pen is clipped to his burgundy cardigan where it always is. He hands Ruth a cup. She wraps both hands around it. The brass key shifts against her chest. Harold died owing nothing to anyone and being owed by everyone, Walt says. That was the richest a man could be. He picks up the thermos, holds it out to her. Keep it. I've got another one. He does not. Ruth knows this. She keeps it. Months pass. The boat is restored. The hull gleams with fresh paint, dark green, same color Harold used. The workshop light burns in the forward hold every evening. The logbook has 14 new entries. Dutch sleeps on the deck in a patch of October sun, his torn left ear smooth against his graying skull, his ribs no longer showing. And then a car pulls onto the gravel at Briggs Landing. A sedan, cracked taillight. A woman behind the wheel, early 20s, white, dark circles under her eyes, a duffel bag in the passenger seat. $34 to her name. You know that number. You've heard it before. Ruth walks down the gangplank. Olive green field jacket, frayed jeans, boots on gravel. She does not ask the woman's name. She does not ask her story. She looks at her the way Harold's photograph looked at the camera, steady, certain, already decided. You eat yet? The woman shakes her head. Come on up. Stove works on the second try. The legacy is not the boat. It is not the bonds or the plaque someone eventually mounts on the wheelhouse wall. It is the act of keeping a promise no one asked you to keep for someone who may never know you kept it. The narrator tells us, the light is still on, the gangplank is down, the logbook has new entries, and if you drive the gravel road along the Gauley River past Barren Fork, and you see a steel-hulled boat with a workshop light burning in the forward hold and an old dog lying on the deck, that is Ruth. That is Harold's promise, still being kept. Home is not where you are born, it is where you stop running. The door is open.